everyone. I'm so glad to have everyone join us. We are doing a seminar today hosted by Dr. Navras and lectured by Dr. Benkin on how anti-Semitic is South Asian anti-Semitism. Everyone can leave your questions on the chat, and we will include Dr. Benkin's email on the chat as well if anybody has further questions he can't get to during the webinar.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second session of the webinar series, Anti-Semitism in South Asia in Comparative Perspective. I'm Navras Aafreedi, a research fellow with ISGAP and also the convener of the series. And we are privileged to have with us Dr. Richard Benkin today as the speaker. Dr. Richard Benkin has been called a one-man army for human rights. To take a few examples, he freed a Muslim journalist who was imprisoned and tortured for writing favorably about Israel, helped people escape terrorist violence, and won armed protection for a Hindu temple under attack, and more. In 2019, he and a group of Pashtun activists visited Buchenwald concentration camp to stand together for justice. A sought-after writer and speaker, his book, A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing, the Murder of Bangladesh's Hindus, provides verified evidence of anti-Hindu atrocities in Bangladesh, the government's complicity in them, and the rest of the world's deliberate silence about it. In What is Moderate Islam, he brings together Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim voices to help end non-productive and inaccurate polar thinking that either calls all Muslims jihadis or refuses to criticize Islam. So before I hand over the floor to Dr. Benkin, let me welcome you all once again to today's session. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat box. And once the lecture is over, Dr. Benkin would be kind enough to take those questions. So I request Dr. Benkin to take over the reins now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aafreedi. You're a dear friend and colleague of many years. And if anyone understands the importance of today's subject, it's you. And you know, understanding it is even more important today, given the geopolitical significance of South Asia. You know, with the shifting sands of self and national interest, we simply can't afford to make assumptions about the essence of anti-Semitism in South Asia or what it means for action. That misses the point, and it leads people to consider potential allies as enemies, as we'll see later. But let me start with some assumptions as we get into this. First, it would be a mistake to try and understand anti-Semitism in South Asia within the context of traditional Western anti-Semitism. To take a very mild illustration, you know, those few people who still refer to Chicago's Maxwell Street area as Jewtown do so despite decades of education that offends Jews. Also, as a result of those decades of education, it really has passed from popular parlance, that expression, as it had been. And you used to be able to see signs on takeout places advertising a Jewtown Polish sausage, and you just don't see that stuff anymore. That's in Chicago, that's in the West. But in South Asia, there's no offense meant at the many signs, store names, and such identifying Jewtown near the Paradisi Synagogue in Kochi. That's not to deny the existence of these things, but to avoid potential pitfalls in our analysis and to determine what should be and should not be addressed and find the most effective ways to address it. Second, while our analysis doesn't focus on South Asia's religions per se, it recognizes the distinct nature of anti-Semitism among post-Judaic Abrahamic faiths, that is Christianity and Islam, versus non-Abrahamic faiths like Hinduism. Now, third, for context, I use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism. I'm going to read that definition. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Now, IHRA company guide provides examples that include traditional anti-Semitic canards like Jews are more loyal to Israel and its supposed international network than to their countries. But it also includes targeting the state of Israel with, and I'm quoting again, double standards by requiring of it behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. That is, it doesn't label all criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, but it does acknowledge that much of what masquerades as policy or politics is nothing more than a smokescreen for Jew hatred. Excuse me. And fourth, in drawing conclusions, I paint with a broad brush and base much on almost 2 decades of participant observation as a Jew in South Asia. So let's begin. Let's start with this insight. In the West, anti-Semitism's origins and continued existence are based on theology and nationalism, both of which makes anti-Semitism the hatred that will not die. In South Asia, anti-Semitism is essentially a foreign phenomenon grafted on the cultures of the region, and that means it's possible to marginalize it or eradicate it among most people. 2 very different phenomena with very different staying power. Western anti-Semitism developed organically from the strong hybrid soil of violent Roman imperialism and Christian religiosity, which is what makes it the hatred that will not die. Anti-Semitism, on the other hand, as I said, was a foreign phenomenon grafted onto cultures of the region. Now, the Roman Empire itself was anti-Jewish long before it made Christianity its official religion. It even waged anti-Jewish genocidal wars in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. And I use the word genocidal deliberately. The first war ended with the wholesale expulsion or murder of most Jews, especially their intelligentsia and other elites, with Roman hordes burning and looting the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, and with the destruction of the Jewish Israelite state. 60 years later, the Emperor Hadrian visited the region and set up a new colony on the ruins of Jerusalem, Aelia Capitolina, and erected a temple to Jupiter where the Jewish temple had stood. That serious desecration helped spark the Dun Bar Kokhba revolt, which brought on the second military campaign that ended with Rome killing, expelling, and enslaving more Jews and renaming Judea Syria Palestina. The Jews refused to do what other occupied peoples were compelled to do, that is, alter their faith and include Roman deities alongside Hashem. That same fidelity to their faith also formed the basis of Christian anti-Semitism, we'll see in a minute. And Why the Jews, which is a great book that I always keep by my desk. Dennis Prager and Rabbi Joseph Telushkin argued that Jews represented an existential threat to the early church. Supersessionism, a key tenet of the faith, and for many now as well, held that Jesus as the Son of God replaced or superseded Jewish law, that with Jesus, belief alone was sufficient. There was no need to follow Jewish laws. But the Jews rejected that. And as Prager and Telushkin wrote, and again I'm quoting, Jews merely by continuing to be Jews threatened the very legitimacy of the church. If Judaism remained valid, then Christianity was invalid, unquote. Belief in Jesus alone was not sufficient, the Jews proclaimed, again, simply by remaining Jews. For this new religion, now wedded to violent Roman imperialism, that simply couldn't stand. Thus, the violent Jew hatred in the writings of many revered fathers of the early church. I'll just give a few examples. St. John Chrysostom, whose appellation means golden mouth, used that golden mouth to call the synagogue worse than a brothel and the refuge of devils. He justified anti-Jewish violence in a way that Catholic historian Malcolm Hay said, quote, would have been useful to the defense at Nuremberg, unquote. St. Ambrose of Milan, another beloved father, established the principle that all damage done by anti-Jewish rioters had to be rectified and paid for by the Jews themselves, which was a principle Joseph Goebbels imposed on Germany's Jews after Kristallnacht. At the Gospel of John, the last gospel written, had Jesus rant to the Jews, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desire. St. Louis, a name we all recognize because we still use it to designate a major U.S. city. St. Louis was an implacable anti-Semite who ordered Jews expelled from France, and after previously being only the second monarch to order the yellow badge, he also ordered 12,000 copies of the Talmud burned. And even good Pope John Paul II began beatifying rabid anti-Semite August Cardinal Holland, who in 1936, and I think the date is significant, told the Polish people, and I'm quoting from him, "So long as Jews remain Jews, the Jewish problem exists and will continue to exist. Jews are waging war against the Catholic Church. They constitute the vanguard of atheism, the Bolshevik movement, and revolutionary activity. It's a fact that Jews have a corruptive influence on morals and that the publishing houses are spreading pornography." Even today's New Catholic Dictionary has an entry on Little St. Hugh of Lincoln. Now, in the 13th century, that 9-year-old boy's body was found in a well, and England's Jews were accused of killing him in a ritual murder. There were widespread anti-Jewish riots, and King Henry III himself took an active role, ordering 90 Jews arrested and held in the Tower of London. They were actually convicted of ritual murder, and 18 were hanged. The rest were saved later by some embarrassed clerics because this whole thing was debunked. Though it has been debunked and as libelous and the cause of much unjust suffering and death, this New Catholic Dictionary that I'm talking about, now this is current, okay, notes that, and I'm quoting again, "Whether there was any truth in the accusation against the Jews, there is now no means of ascertaining." Really? You mean it might be true? Hey, that kind of crap keeps Jew hatred and the blood libel alive, and quite different in the West. There's even a boys' school in Lincolnshire, England, named after St. Hugh, and I guess the old song, "Teach your children well." Stuff keeps us alive. But South Asia is quite different. Just outside the main worship hall of Kochi's Paradesi Synagogue is a room whose walls are covered with paintings that depict the arrival of South Asia's first Jews after that first Roman genocide in 72 CE. There is evidence that supports the validity of their depiction, and there are anecdotal accounts of Jewish-Hindu interaction even earlier. Judean traders visiting India during King Solomon's time, and emigres arriving after the first temple was destroyed in 587 BCE. Well, whether it's the first or the second, as such, Judaism was the first foreign religion in India, and so arrived without the baggage of Roman and Christian anti-Semitism. In fact, Indians pride themselves on the fact that Jews never faced the bigotry and official hatred in India that they did in the West, other than, of course, the foreign colonial imposition of the Portuguese Inquisition in Goa that targeted Hindus and Muslims as well as Jews. Yet it would be wrong to say that there's no anti-Semitism in South Asia today. But again, we'll never understand its dynamics unless we throw away the prism of Western anti-Semitism. Here's a couple illustrations of what can happen when we don't. Or while preparing for this piece, I found myself leafing through a copy of Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's biography, Jew-hating manifesto. I bought it in an open-air market in Kolkata one night, and recall how the vendor who sold it to me, he had no idea, really, of the book's place in the panoply of hate. He knew that Hitler led Germany to a string of, as he put it, amazing successes in World War II before being defeated. And also that Indians fought alongside the British against Hitler in the war. And let me mention here, for many Indians, the enemy of my enemy is my friend mantra sometimes has them curious about this fierce opponent of their colonial oppressors. The Kolkata vendor also knew that Hitler hated Jews and killed some, but really couldn't provide any context for what happened and any history that could have caused the phenomenon, other than he said, well, Hitler was a bad guy. But even that too, that assessment was a foreign import with little emotional content. Mein Kampf's publisher in India, Janko, also published its Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl. And while that makes little sense from a Western point of view, there's no contradiction if we understand that South Asians' anti-Semitism simply doesn't work the same way. Now, I've also helped with recent discussions between American Jewish and Hindu communities over a New York State Senate bill that recognizes the swastika as a symbol of hate. And the bill reads in part, as many of our youth are not aware of the hateful connotations behind swastikas and nooses, it's necessary for the legislature to mandate compulsory education in all schools across our great state in regard to the meaning of these two symbols of hate. But the swastika is also a Hindu religious symbol that predates the Nazis' hateful appropriation by millennia and remains a treasured symbol in the Hindu religion. It's said to bring good luck and well-being, so on roads throughout India, whether in places like New Delhi and Mumbai or in remote villages, you see swastikas on car windows, none of them having anything to do with Nazism or anti-Semitism. So Hindus are incensed about this attempt to declare the religious symbol hateful and to mandate teaching it to their children, no less. So consider, I'm involved in protests for Sri Lankan government about forced cremations of Muslims. Muslims like Jews prescribe cremation. Well, how different is that religious freedom violation from one forcing Hindu children to learn that their religious symbol is hateful? At the same time, like so many other Jews, I lost a lot of family in the Shoah and have come to find it in the Nazis testable. And as the crisis has heated up, I've been receiving emails from Jewish groups showing pictures of Indians wearing clothing or jewelry adorned with swastikas. And the messages are supposed to prove that Hindus view Hitler and Nazis with favor. Well, it doesn't do that. It simply doesn't do that. But it does show that, again, we can't understand the existence of or lack of anti-Semitism in South Asia without the historical baggage that we in the West bring. Again, someone showing a swastika in India is quite different from someone showing a swastika here, I think. Now, I have not faced serious anti-Semitism myself in India, aside for some anti-Israel partisans, but I have encountered ignorance and stereotype. Navras, you're going to remember this. In 2009, Dr. Aafreedi arranged for me to give 2 days of talks at Lucknow University. On our way to the car after the second day, I know you remember this, a young man ran out he was wearing religious Muslim garb. He ran out of the Islamic Studies Center and invited us to come in for tea, which we did. One person there was an Urdu journalist, and and he and I had a rather animated debate about what he called the occupation. And as we were leaving, he said very nonchalantly, and Navras, I'm going to clean up my response a little bit for propriety's sake, but he said rather nonchalantly, well, every Muslim child knows that the world's media is controlled by 8 Jews. Really, I said. Who? Rupert Murdoch. Not Jewish, I said. Next. He said, well, Ted Turner. Well, Ted Turner? I don't know if he even likes Jews. Went on and on. I mean, the point is, it was nonsense. And here was a journalist, an opinion maker and giver of information, so ignorant about Jews, yet repeating bigotry as if it was accepted common knowledge. And that ignorance, with a political overlay that people try to associate with religion, is at the heart of South Asian anti-Semitism. Well, back to the Goa imposition. Catholic Portugal imposed it on India about 15 years after Columbus arrived in America. Its focus was to root out new Christians who continued to practice their faiths. And though former Hindus and former Muslims way outnumbered Jews, the Portuguese Inquisition in India, like its big brothers in Europe, had a particular animus for them. Portugal's King Manuel I expelled the Jews from Portugal in 1497, and many fled on trading ships, with a lot ending up in India. Why in India? Well, first of all, there was no native anti-Semitism in India, as there was in Europe. India also presented trading opportunities barred to Jews in Europe. And there was an old and well-established Jewish community, not far from Portuguese-controlled Goa, in Kochi, that welcomed Jews and were ready to accept those forcibly converted to Catholicism back into the faith. And significantly, after the Inquisition was abolished in 1812, hostility towards so-called crypto-Hindus and crypto-Muslims remained in the Christian community there, but anti-Semitism largely evaporated. Again, we see that anti-Semitism is a foreign import with no real traction among Indians. But again, we do find ignorance. And one point that keeps coming back is conflating being a Jew with being Israeli. In 2009, I was in Delhi to be the featured presenter at a seminar for lawyers who practiced before the Indian Supreme Court. The event was held just across from that chamber, and I arrived to see a big sign reading, again, I'm quoting from the sign, Jihad, the Jews' Response, Lessons for India, a talk by Dr. Richard Benkin, noted Jew thinker and human rights activist. But the conveners, they were well-educated people with large imprint on Indian public life, yet even their knowledge is quite limited because, you see, they didn't want the Jewish response to terrorism. In fact, most Jews would find the notion of getting a single Jewish response to anything, let alone this, hilarious and absurd. No, they didn't want the Jewish response. They wanted Israel's response to terrorism. That is, as they always tell me, why tiny Israel can do what giant India cannot. And here I am, an American citizen who's never been anything but an American citizen. But for most of the South Asians I've encountered, that also means Israeli. Anti-Semitism, or what we might think is anti-Semitic in South Asia, has, again, two basic sources: ignorance and politics, nothing as emotionally impactful as religion. I also disagree with those who've been trying to identify Hindu nationalists as anti-Semitic and to suggest that it's inherent in their philosophy. That, too, is politics and reflects the writers' distaste for Hindutva, the BJP, Narendra Modi, or conservatives in general, I think. But there is an anti-Semitic strain. Again, we have a group of Hindu and Jewish Americans who put on events like a Hindu-Jewish festival of lights that celebrate Diwali and Hanukkah together. And recently we were working on some other events when one of our Hindu members, many of whom are Hindu nationalists, remarked on some of the pushback we were getting by saying that, and I'm quoting him again, there are some in our community who are against working with Jews. So that dislike is there, but I got to tell you, third parties who've called out groups like the RSS as endemically anti-Semitic are hoping to convince people of something that simply does not exist. I mean, the RSS and other Hindutva groups have had me address their members regularly, and as you can probably tell, I'm very openly and proudly Jewish and Zionist. Anti-Semitic individuals among Hindu nationalists? Yes. But no one's been able to provide anything except anecdotal evidence of anything more than that. It's certainly something to be watched and opposed, but nothing organic. Now, religious overtones do exist in South Asia's Muslim majority countries, but they're secondary to politics, and again, thrive on ignorance. Somewhere in the Bangladeshi legal system, our government papers identifying me as an agent of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. Of course, there's no truth to it, and my guess is if real agents ever thought about it, they'd find the notion rather humorous. But no one was laughing when they made the charge. And the Mossad accusation in Bangladesh adds a sinister and dangerous dimension to my status in the region where conspiracy theories abound. In fact, one longtime Bangladeshi colleague explained, and again, I'm quoting him, you can be sure to have a lot of supporters in Bangladesh, no matter what it is, if you condemn Israel. He also said that calling something a Zionist plot is a credible way to deflect criticism or cover failures. Dr. Shadman Zaman, a 25-year-old Bangladeshi who moved to Israel, said he grew up surrounded by classic anti-Semitism with school books that taught that Jews are the mirror of Satan and Zionists control the world. And no doubt, I have absolutely no doubt of that. But again, I never encountered anti-Semitism unless it came from Islamists or foreigners like the Iranians who've picketed my presence with anti-Semitic tropes. There's one exception, and it came from H.D. Imam, a close confidant of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who actually holds a cabinet-level post. On March 10, 2015, human rights activist and another dear colleague of mine, Ravindra Ghosh, met with the H.T. Imam about the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh. Imam, like most Bangladeshi officials, just dismissed the notion out of hand. So Ghosh brought up my longstanding activism and extensive documentation of anti-Hindu atrocities in Bangladesh. And Imam replied to him, and I got a quote here too. Imam said to him, "Oh, Dr. Benkin is working for the interests of the Jews." And he warned Ghosh not to meet with me in Calcutta as he planned. Fortunately, he did and provided me with a very thick dossier of government-tolerated persecution. Now, according to B'nai B'rith Anti-Defamation League, Imam is an outlier. Its 2014 poll of global anti-Semitism sampled 102 countries, and Bangladesh was tied for 50th on that scale, squarely in the middle of the pack. And it bested both France and Greece. Now, this distinction is not merely academic. Anti-Semitism simply is not embedded in the Bengali cultural narrative. The arguments used to demonize Israel contain anti-Semitic canards, and there's certainly a significant Islamist element among Bengalis who promote Jew hatred. But yet, even the Bangladeshi government, while taking no action to combat or actively condemn that, doesn't adopt or express those anti-Jewish attitudes even when criticizing Israel. And that's pretty significant. Now, Bangladesh, and in Pakistan didn't appear in the ADL study. It's too difficult and too dangerous to sample, I guess. And admittedly, of the three South Asian countries, I know Pakistan the least. But I do, however, work closely with Pashtun, Sindhi, and Baluch minorities there. Now, Pashtuns claim descent from ancient Israel's 10 lost tribes, and other Pakistanis often derisively call them Yahud, meaning Jew. And doing so, one Pashtun colleague told me, is intended to make them less legitimate as Muslims. But again, while giving it a religious veneer, the phenomenon is essentially political. The Pashtuns emphasize not only their Muslim status, but in fact, they strongly emphasize their ethnic nationalist status and the principles that guide that. Another Pashtun colleague told me that that he got in trouble because those strengthening those other identities by radicals are often considered contrary to being a good Muslim. And he said to me that, again, I'm quoting, "During childhood, I considered the Jews and the rest of and all other non-Muslims as the worst enemies of Islam, and that jihad should be fought against them." I think that's a pretty telling statement. Is there a lot of anti-Jewish prejudice? Sure. Yes, but only to the extent that it serves other, less particularistic goals. So yes, South Asia's radical imams give anti-Jewish sermons and polemics, and there's certainly a lot of casual anti-Semitism that people kind of toss off. And these same radicals use the Quran and Hadith to try to give make Jew hatred a religious duty. But the simple reality is that that's replicated globally. That's not a South Asian phenomenon. And as long as these expressions of anti-Semitism remain largely the province of extremes, they're really no more reflective of the general population than were the Charlottesville, Virginia march was a reflection of Americans when they marched chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." So really the important question is, what do we do? And I think the first answer is we leave our assumptions at the door and stop acting like expressions in South Asia mean the same thing they do in the West. 2, remember, ignorance is a problem. The antidote to ignorance is education. Education. Rather than get into that, I'll just mention, Dr. Aafreedi really is the expert on that. I don't think anyone's done as much for so long, done that hard work to try and educate effectively about Jews. So I wouldn't even try to suggest anything more than just referring to Dr. Aafreedi's work and efforts over years and years and years. And third, depoliticize things. Conflating Jews with Israel means identifying Jews as the villains of that conflict for many. And for many, that somehow is tied to being a Muslim religious duty. But we actually have reason for hope on this front. Besides being the year of COVID, 2020 was a year of unprecedented change in the Israel-Arab Jew-Muslim conflict. And there's so many reasons to celebrate the Abraham Accords, by which several Muslim-majority countries embraced the Jewish state. But I believe their greatest achievement was decoupling the religious conflict from the political one. And that really has an impact on South Asia here. In one of my earliest human rights battles, as Navras mentioned, I freed a Bangladeshi Muslim journalist who was charged with blasphemy for urging relations with Israel. You still want to charge him with treason or something else, fine, but call it blasphemy. Say that urging relations with Israel is blasphemous, then more and more Muslim leaders are likewise guilty of blasphemy for having relations with Israel. And even though it's not full diplomatic relations, even the heart of Islam, the land where the Prophet trod, where Islam was born, Saudi Arabia, we now know has some level of relations with Israel. Are the Saudis blasphemous as well? So it really does have the opportunity to change the essential nature of the conflict and the essential nature of anti-Semitism, where it's not an organic phenomenon. If we stay that deep political course, sure, there's still going to be anti-Semitism in South Asia and radical imams spewing hatred towards Jews, but fewer and fewer Muslims, I believe, will see their stance on Israel as anything more than political, especially as Muslim countries in the region reap the benefits of relations with Israel, and it trickles down to the population. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benkin, for your very intellectually stimulating lecture. Now, may I request you to take any questions?
All right, I'm just going to go, wow, there are a lot. I'm just going to go in order here. Okay, as a survivor of the, okay, something else. Again, well, most of these aren't questions. Let's see.
No, there is a question from Andrea. To
Yeah,
what
okay.
degree has radical Islam taken hold among the Muslim population? And isn't it true that Jew hatred forms a significant component of the Islamic fundamentalists teach in Pakistan and Imran Khan's hatred of Israel?
Oh yeah, I mean, and in fact, I said that very thing. My point about anti-Semitism, and I'll get back to your question. My point about anti-Semitism in South Asia again is that if you decouple the religious and political issues, you have a chance to really make a difference. Doing that, educating people so they're not ignorant about Jewish history. And I got to tell you, I mean, Pakistan, Bangladesh have relations with Israel, and those countries that the people start reaping the benefits that other nations have reaped from having relations with Israel, and you'll see a lot of it evaporate. So yes, there's virulent radicalization, anti-Semitism among Islamists, and I have to say, unfortunately, that in both Pakistan and Bangladesh, a lot of people ignore it. They ignore this in Bangladesh. There has been increased radicalization. I just have not seen it trickle down, especially in Bangladesh. I have not seen it trickle down to the common person, to the extent that if you do something with Islamists, that it would affect the expression of anti-Semitism. Coming again, decoupling this religious, making the conflict in the Middle East political and not religious, will go a long way in doing that. Navras, you want to pick the question since you seem to have a better beat on them than I do?
Yes, I don't see another question here. But what you just said about Bangladesh, if you allow me, may I add something to it?
Yes.
Some time ago, I read an article by Shalva Weil, who is an anthropologist with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and has devoted her life to the study of South Asian Jewry. And she wrote in her article that all Jews in Bangladesh left the country except for two families, And the two families that remained in Bangladesh, even they converted to Christianity. They did not remain Jewish. So I know the reasons as to why Jews left South Asia in so large a number. I can speak for India and Pakistan when they came into existence in 1947. And later on, the Jews who left the country did so because there were so few of them left that it was hard to sustain a Jewish communal life. And there were, of course, many other reasons too. But in the case of India, anti-Semitism certainly did not figure among the reasons. But I am curious to know as to what happened in Bangladesh. That is the only two Jews who remained in Bangladesh, even they abandoned the religion that they were born in and converted to Christianity.
Yeah, which was interesting. They converted to Christianity because, of course, Bangladesh Islam is the official state religion, and other religions, and even more and more so Christianity too, is being oppressed. But yeah, I got to tell you, all the years I've been going to Bangladesh, people have always, said, "Oh, they're Jews in Bangladesh." But as you've pointed out, I've never encountered or seen any evidence of that. I think, it's funny though, if you talk to average Bangladeshis, I mean, almost everyone acknowledges the Jewish Indian general who helped them win their War of Independence, or the Jew who designed yeah, that's right, or the Jew who designed the Parliament building. So
yes,
it's tough. It's tough being Jewish. It's tough being Jewish in the West, but it's even tougher in places like Bangladesh. You just don't have a community to support you. You don't have other people who you can go to or who are like-minded. So again, I've never encountered any Jews. I understand why they converted, but I just again, it's just real. It's much more nuanced. Yes, there's increased radicalizations. Yes, the radicals are nasty, nasty people. And you get all kinds of anti-Israel stuff in Bangladesh. But again, on the level of the common Bangladeshi, Muslim or Hindu, I know plenty of both. It just don't see that inbred organic anti-Semitism. Again, let's not don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm not trying to wish it away or say it's nothing we have to worry about. Only it's quite a different phenomenon than it is here in the West. And I believe again that we can work on the political, educational dimensions and do something about it in South Asia, which, as we know, we've had education about anti-Semitism in the West for centuries, and that hasn't eliminated anti-Semites.
Okay, we have another question. The question is that anti-Zionism is very much a part of academia in the West. So is it not also part of social sciences in India? There is also a strong campaign among intellectuals to not adopt IRA. So how might India deal with this? Will the country adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism?
Well, I have no idea whether it'll adopt that definition. There's a lot of pushback from often from academics, but not only from here in the West. So not every state has adopted that definition. My experience on you talk about academics in India. My experience on college campuses in India, and I've spoken at more than I'd like to count, is that again, opposition is political, and it tends. I don't want to offend anyone or seem to be making generalization, but let's say I am painting with a broad brush. As I said, it tends to be centered among leftists and in the more leftist universities. And again, in that regard, it is entirely a political phenomenon, or in many of the leftist philosophies, communism, there is a distaste for all religion, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same as it is here in the West.
We have another question. Are there particular parts of civil society in the countries you mentioned that are either helpful or damaging to educating the populations in South Asia?
Okay, well, let's say, let me first, I like full disclosure. I know I have a specific perspective, and I speak out of that perspective. And so if you're talking about individual, elements of the population, first, I mean, you're going to have the odd former terrorists, and we see them and they speak, and that's fine. But more than that, I mentioned in Pakistan, I mentioned national minorities, like the Pashtun, because they practice Islam, and most Pashtuns, Sindhi and Baluch are Muslim by far. They practice Islam in general as a way that's quite different. And what I think is really critical is each of these groups they each emphasize their national identity as well. And for those who try and tell the population that their one identity, overwhelming identity, has to be the religious one, this really is, I think that's one of the most important ways to fight back against the attempt to say that it's all religious. Remember, Pakistan was created out of that same principle. And Jinnah, in fact, said very much, I think it was in 1940 speech he made. But yeah, so I think those minorities are important. With regards to Bangladesh, I think that, again, the minority Hindu population can help, but I've also found a real willingness among many in journalism in particular, to a real curiosity about, well, what kind of information are we not getting? What kind of information is being withheld from our people? And I think that's a significant group. And let me go, getting back to the journalists, I can tell you that quite a few years ago, I had arranged some interactions between the Bangladeshi government and the Israeli government. And one of the things that the Israeli government proposed as an easy way to start having some level of relation without it being something that would cause political problems for the Awami League or the BNP, was to have a delegation of journalists from Bangladesh go to Israel. Yes, they'd have to have the public sanction of their government, but that they go there. And of course, the Israelis, for people who are familiar with Israel, they were very clear. Look, they can write whatever they want. We are not going to limit what they write. But again, I think looking at the journalist community and trying to address their beliefs as journalists, offering exclusive guest columns and things like that. There are other areas, I think. So there are a lot, because it's not so suffused throughout civil society, but more, again, merely a foreign veneer. I think those sorts of places are really prime places to help fight anti-Semitism. Navras, you're muted, I think.
Oh, thank you. So there is another question. How much is it anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, or anti-Zionism? And do people know the differences?
Well, I think I addressed that in my talk. And the problem, as I've said, is, well, look, first of all, as I said, I believe with Ira that much of what people say is, oh, it's just policy or politics. It's just a smokescreen for anti-Semitism. But for a lot of people, they say it's not, all anti-criticism is not anti-Semitic. But getting back to this, again, the problem is when people are given information that leads them to conflate being Jewish with being an Israeli, because then it's impossible to focus on a political conflict without including a religious conflict. So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's part of the conflation of Israeli and Jewish is part of that ignorance that Dr. Aafreedi has been working against for all these years.
And then we have another question. The question is that is it the way Jews are portrayed and depicted in popular culture that shapes the perceptions of Jews among South Asians?
Yeah, I would think so, but only to the extent that that real information is not there. You know, if those depictions don't make sense given what they're taught in their schools or in their mandirs or madrasas or mosques, then those popular cultural depictions will die of their own. They just won't have the resonance with people. But barring that kind of good information, look, the people in South Asia in that regard are no different than people anywhere else. They're going to look at it, and unless we have a particularly critical eye or based on experience, people tend to look at these popular cultural offerings and assume that they're not nonsense.
Okay, there is a question that what do you mean by organic? What about Jews and money? Do they say that?
Well, again, that's one of the stereotypes, and you hear that periodically. You know, even from Philo-Semites, I've met in South Asia, Philo-Semites who will say, "Oh, you guys are so good with money," and they believe that's a compliment. But again, it's stereotype. I mean, but the point is, yes, you are going to hear these things. But again, I got to get back to my essential message. If they have no resonance in the soil of the country, then those sorts of expressions will, you know, again, they'll just die of their own with education. And when I say organic, I mean that anti-Semitism in the West clearly, I mean, you can draw a very straight line, clearly grew out of the early church and grew out of Roman imperialism. And those two elements, Christianity and Rome, truly define the makeup of Western culture, particularly European culture. So even today, of course, we all know about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. We know that, you know, anti-Semitism never went away. People are just too embarrassed about it to be public about it after the Shoah. But so that's what I mean by organic. It flows naturally from the conflicts the early church had to resolve and how they resolved it, from the conflicts between Judaism or Judea and the Roman Empire and the way Rome dealt with it, as compared to South Asia. You just don't find that same straight line. Again, the first real elements of anti-Semitism came from the Portuguese. And then again, you had foreigners from Western Asia bringing a different kind of anti-Semitism. But again, nothing grew from the basic cultures of South Asia.
Then there is a question that would you attribute anti-Semitism in Muslim countries purely to politics?
Yes and no. That's a great question. No, bigotry and hatred exists, and whether we're talking about the United States, my country, or or South Asia, of course it exists. My point is not what constitutes or what contributes to it, but that if we separate those two elements, if we identify the political conflict in the Middle East as non-religious, as not a duty for every good Muslim to take a stand on, then of course we break that connection, that anti-Semitic connection, again, and let me get back to it. Once you break that connection, then you have a chance to fill the gap with good education.
Okay, so perhaps it's time for us to end the session now. We've consumed almost 1 hour. So I thank Dr. Benkin for his immensely rewarding lecture. It's a gratitude from me and also on behalf of ISGAP that I thank you. I also thank all the people who joined us today for today's session. And I also take the opportunity to request you to join us for our following sessions as well under the auspices of this series. So before we end the session, let me check with my colleague, Ms. Clement, if she would like to say something before we end the session. Daphne, do you have something to say?
Hello. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Benkin. It was an honor to have you lecture with us. Thank you, Navras, for putting this together. I want to encourage everyone to come back to our next lecture. I've included all the links in the chat, and I'll also put them on the screen before I go. And this was an honor. Hope to see all of you soon.
Thank you very much. And Navras, I'm telling you, I can't wait till this pandemic is done so I can see you again in India.
I look forward to that most eagerly. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody, for joining us. And many thanks once again to Dr. Benkin and to ISGAP for giving us the opportunity to have this series. All sessions in this series take place on Thursdays.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.